Mr. Mayor. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
Thanks for joining us.
You enjoying the bus?
I am, yeah. It's starting to feel like a second home.
Once you hit bus status, that's kind of a sign of
yeah, we've arrived.
Some level of success. And as I understand it, everyone from Steven Spielberg and Glenn Beck and Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney have been on this vehicle specifically.
Sounds like this bus has a very bipartisan history, but I'm trying to pull it a little more in our direction.
Let's start by talking a little bit about health care. You have a new plan out, Medicare for All Who Want It.
Right.
How is it different from the Affordable Care Act as it currently exists?
So the Affordable Care Act is a marketplace of private insurance options. The idea of Medicare for All Who Want It is a public alternative. Medicare for All Who Want It means we take a version of Medicare and we make it available for every American. I believe that this will be a better option than any of the private plans out there. I also believe Americans ought to be able to decide for themselves. And so the way we have this set up is this Medicare for All Who Want It will be available to everybody. But if for some reason you prefer to stick to a private plan, we're not going to order you to abandon it. We're not going to shut down the private insurance industry. We are going to create an alternative that I think most Americans are going to prefer. And if people like me are right, then it's going to be a pathway to Medicare for All without somebody in Washington having to guess how many years it'll take for that transition to happen. We'll let the American people decide.
So the ultimate end goal is a government-run healthcare system.
I think that's that it's going to lead toward everybody or almost everybody opting into that public plan, but you're not required to. So the important thing to me is not whether or not the government's the main insurer. The important thing to me is that everybody get care. It doesn't matter to me in principle who's giving it. It matters to me how Americans are able to get it.
Now, as I understand it, your plan would automatically enroll people in a public option if they're eligible.
That's right, if you don't have private coverage.
Should they be forced to do that, though?
Well, we need to make sure that everybody has coverage because otherwise that creates a cost to the system. When you go into an emergency room and you don't have coverage, somebody is picking that up, and it's usually a combination of crushing medical bills and debt for the patient and or a hospital absorbing that cost. This way, that can't happen. You can't fall through the cracks, and that benefits all of us and helps keep costs under control.
Would undocumented immigrants be eligible for this plan?
Yes, they would be eligible to buy into the plan, pay a premium, and get covered.
And what happens over time to those thousands of people who work for those private insurance companies if the goal is to eventually eradicate the private healthcare insurance industry?
Well, even in countries that have not just a single payer but socialized medicine, there's still a private insurance industry as well, at least in most countries. So I don't expect that the private industry ever goes away completely. I do expect that over the years it shifts and more people working in healthcare will either be involved in care itself instead of administration or will be involved in other parts of the industry. But there will be years for this to develop.
In recent days, you and some others have been calling out Elizabeth Warren for the fact that she will not admit that her Medicare for All plan would require a tax increase for middle-class Americans. Does your plan require a tax increase for middle-class Americans?
No. We can fund what I am proposing without raising taxes on any but perhaps the top 2%. Now, I do believe that our tax code needs to be fairer. There are corporations and very wealthy Americans who should be paying their fair share and aren't. And we're going to adjust that, not just in order to fund our health care plan, but in order to fund the needs of this country. It's not punitive, it's not unreasonable, it's just what we need in order to make sure that we can move forward as a country. But everything that I propose, from health care to education to climate change, will be fully funded because I believe it's important that what we do reduces or at least does not increase the deficit. You know, Republicans have talked for a long time about debts and the deficit. And it turns out, based on their behavior when they're in power, that they don't care. That means that if Democrats don't start to care about this, nobody will. And as it's just my perspective as the youngest candidate in the field, but I'm worried that a lot of these financial time bombs that have been set by both parties, but especially by Republicans right now, that those time bombs will go off on my watch or during my lifetime.
Well, speaking of Republicans, let's say you get elected president. There's still a Democratic House. You have to put up with at least a Republican Senate. How do you convince Republicans to support something that in essence starts to chip away at the current system, which they already have issues with.
Well, the good news is the overwhelming majority of the American people favor this approach. As a matter of fact, most of the things that we are for in this campaign and in my party have very strong American majority behind them.
But that argument hasn't worked on virtually any issue in recent years. The Democrats would argue, well, the American public's with us. Well, okay, but you still have a Republican Congress that doesn't want to work with you on it.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to have a nominee with coattails because I refuse to accept that a Republican Senate is inevitable. And the best strategy by far for dealing with Mitch McConnell is for him to not be in the majority anymore. That being said, in the event that we're dealing with a Republican Senate, I do think that a very good use of that big airplane that comes with the Oval Office is to fly it into the home state of a senator who is blocking something like background checks that 90% of Americans want, or who is trying to take away health insurance from Americans, or who is blocking a minimum wage increase or paid family leave, and remind that senator's voters of what they're doing, because there's also going to be an election coming up in 2022.
On the flip side, your plan creates a large role for the government to play in health care, but progressives would say not large enough. Mm-hmm. How do you convince the more liberal members of your party to support this kind of a plan? It's
simple. If Medicare for all is ideal, then why would you need to command Americans to accept it? Mine is the best of all worlds. It creates this Medicare for all who want it option, but it does it without ordering anybody to go over to it before they want to. And if, as progressives, we are right that this is the best option, then the American people should be able to decide that for themselves. I don't know what my competitors to the left are afraid of in giving people that choice.
We talked a little bit about the state of the race last night, a few others on that. I think you mentioned, and I know it's been highlighted by others, that only 1 in 5 likely caucus goers so far has said they're sold, they've made a decision, they're ready to go.
Right.
How do you convince everyone else over the next 130 or so days that you're the guy they should vote for?
Well, they need to see you in action. And so you're going to see, in addition to the national conversations that I'm having in places like the Democratic candidate debates, you're going to see me on the ground here in Iowa, directly making the case to voters. In these early states, they want to not only read about what you're planning to do, but kick the tires a little bit, get the sense of the kind of person you are, especially with so many Democrats with largely similar values. I think people are looking not only for a set of policies, but for a kind of leader that is going to lead us in a very, very different place than this current president is. And this is my opportunity to show, as well as tell, what kind of leader I would be for the American people.
You've seen this situation with Ukraine and the president and former Vice President Biden play out over the last few days. The Biden campaign's made hay of it. They're already sending fundraising emails saying, see, this just proves the president is most scared of running against the former vice president. I'm curious, do you think your party is ready to stomach having another nominee who would face questions, whether they're proven or not, of family members who have business overseas?
Look, the president is going to go for the lowest blow that he can with whatever Democratic nominee he faces. And it's hard even to predict the depths that he will go. And if there's not something for him to take advantage of, he will make something up. So at risk of sounding quaint, I think what we ought to do is put up the nominee that we think will make the best president, because I think that gives us the best shot of having voters of varying backgrounds and values decide to support our candidate. And by the way, that's how we usually win. When we overthink this and get too strategic, think about what candidate will do these things in the process with other voters that we don't agree with, that's when we usually come up short. We win when we put forward the candidate we think is the most inspiring and the most prepared to lead us forward.
In your view, has the former vice president explained enough what did or didn't go on with either himself or his son in the Ukraine at this point?
I'll leave it to him to talk about all of those things. What I will say is that this isn't the last time we'll see unfair attacks from the current president on Democrats. And by the way, the president has made a shocking confession. Let's just be very clear. The president has confessed to wrongdoing. And in light of that shocking confession, every congressional Republican ought to go on the record and clarify whether they condemn or support what he has done.
And on that point, you've been pushing House Speaker Pelosi on the issue of impeachment and whether or not it's time to do that. over the weekend, she sent a letter essentially telling her colleagues that if the president doesn't cough up more information on this, it will, quote, take us into a whole new stage of investigation. Is she moving fast enough, in your view, on impeachment?
I'm going to be honest, she knows a hell of a lot more about strategy on guiding a House Democratic caucus than just about any of us. And so I respect that she's got a strategy, and a strategy that takes into account the need to show that we've exhausted alternatives and the need to gather the right kind of support. What I'll say from the outside looking in is that in terms of checks and balances, I think it's very clear that the House has a responsibility to stick up for the rule of law. And I think that's what they're trying to do. We also know what the Senate is going to do about this, which is nothing at all. All the more reason that we need to at least get every Republican senator and House member on the record as to whether they condemn or endorse the wrongdoing, perhaps criminal wrongdoing, by this president.
But in your view, he should be impeached?
He should, but that's almost an academic question at this point.
Right.
In my view, he should be defeated, and that's the part that I actually get to have something to say about.
Because, I mean, you feel that way, other Democrats out here certainly feel that way, but a majority of Americans still aren't there. So is it really worth pursuing if a majority of the country is telling Congress, don't go there?
I don't know that a majority of Americans care very much that they not impeach any more than a majority of Americans care that they do. For every question I get about this from a voter, there's probably 10 to 100 times I get this question from a reporter. The reality is voters want to know how their lives are going to be different. And I don't think there's tremendous angst among most voters either way on that particular procedural question in the House. Folks want health care. They want immigration to be fixed. They want wages to go up. They want their kids to be safe in school. And they want a president who doesn't make their blood pressure go up. And that's what I can deliver.
Well, let's talk about how things might be a little different in terms of foreign policy, were you president. This situation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The president is now is sending at least some military personnel to Saudi Arabia to help out. Is that the right move?
In the current circumstances, it may well be required. The question is, how do we take control of the current circumstances so that they don't keep escalating? Look, right now, we've got an unstable situation that has been destabilized by the American president. And the Middle East has a way of being unstable all on its own, without any help from the White House. What we see now, as a consequence of a chain reaction that began with the U.S. withdrawing from the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, is that things are headed in the wrong direction. Tensions are escalating. We've done almost nothing toward resolving the civil conflict in Yemen, which is spilling over because it's a proxy fight between the Iranians and the Saudis. And we continue to have an energy policy which makes us more subject than we should be to the internal struggle for regional security superiority among two players, Saudi Arabia and Iran, neither of which is exactly operating according to American values.
Which begs the question, does Saudi Arabia even deserve U.S. military assistance in a situation like this?
Well, I don't think the U.S.-Saudi relationship is really built on shared values. I think it's built on a certain sense of what our interests are that could be improved if we were moving beyond a fossil fuel economy. I think it's also the case that as Saudi Arabia tests the limits of our friendship, for example, murdering a journalist who was a U.S. resident, there need to be some kind of consequences for that. Now, for the current president, this seems to just be a dollars and cents relationship. To me, it is about American security, and it is about American values. And there should be some sense that we will enforce our values when they are challenged by a country that's supposed to be our ally, let alone what we see happening across the Gulf from a player like Iran.
If you were at the United Nations General Assembly this week as president, and you could meet with only 4 other world leaders, who would they be?
Well, I think it's time to strengthen our relationships with European allies. And so either Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron, who in many ways I think is emerging as a kind of successor generation leader in Central Europe. I think we need to shore that up and have that conversation.
So that's 1 or 2.
Yeah, we'll do 1A and 1B.
Okay.
About that. We need to engage with Iran. Now, I wouldn't do it without some kind of sense that there was momentum, but if our respective diplomatic relationships could produce even the smallest incremental trust-building measure, I think that would justify a conversation about how we could cause tensions in that region to go down rather than up.
That would require lifting sanctions on Iranian leaders. So you'd be open to doing that? Because they say they wouldn't meet with Americans unless that happens.
I think we could find a way if the focus of U.S. policy were to de-escalate rather than ratchet up tension.
So that's two.
Yeah.
We've got 1A, 1B, and 2.
I would like to have a conversation with the new leader of El Salvador, someone who is, I think, actually a little bit younger than I am,
Right.
and represents a part of the country, the world, Central America, where we have a lot at stake. First of all, the Central American Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, are countries whose instability is contributing to issues at our own border, and also countries that are seeking to stabilize and improve what's happening there. They should have a friend in our hemisphere, in the United States, and I'd like to have a dialogue about how to get that going.
Okay. You got one more.
Well, I think we'd better increase the rate of conversation we're having with Xi Jinping. The China challenge is going to be one of the dominant issues for the United States in my lifetime. As I mentioned at the debate, the president said he would like to see me negotiate with Xi Jinping. I'd like to see him produce a deal with Xi Jinping, but since it hasn't happened, I think we need to have a very frank conversation about ways in which we will adjust the future of the relationship. And that may include an orderly decoupling of some of our technological interdependencies, because they have very different values. They're developing their technology according to very different values, including different ideas about surveillance. And the relationship technologically that we have could become a U.S. security vulnerability. This is not just about trade. This is about technology, security, and stability.
I heard you say on the bus yesterday you're working on your final budget proposal back home in South Bend. The other issue, of course, that drew a lot of your attention, drew a lot of attention from across the country over the summer was the situation with the police shooting. Mm-hmm. It's been about 3 months. How has that situation evolved? And in your view, are things in a better place in your city than they were then?
Yeah, the pain that we went through as a community as a consequence of that situation has led to a very constructive dialogue about the future of policing in the community. It's prompted us to look at new ways to give community members a voice in the way policy decisions are made on everything from the use of force to the use of body-worn cameras. And even as information is still being gathered in the outside investigation of that particular incident, we know that we didn't have to wait in order to act as a community and work to build trust. There will continue to be major challenges around race and policing in our city, and I think in any diverse urban city in America. And it's all the more reason why we need not only local leadership to deal with this, but also a national environment that helps reverse the disempowerment of communities of color, and especially when it comes to police, the relationship with Black Americans that's partly about policing, but also largely about deep questions of institutional racism that impact housing, health, and economic opportunity.
You're still struggling to build support among Black and Latino voters in this country. If they get asked about you or they see you and they think, oh, you know, interesting that he's young, interesting that he's a military veteran, but you know, he's a white guy, he doesn't understand our situation, and there was a police shooting in his town just like there is in every other city in this country. I don't know, there's got to be somebody better than that. What's your argument to them? Why should they be looking at you right now as a potential president?
Well, first of all, I've put forward the most comprehensive plan of any candidate on dealing with systemic racism in this country. And it's motivated not just by the conversations I've been having as a candidate, but by the experience of leading a diverse city that has these challenges as a consequence not only of local dynamics, but what's going on around the country. It won't get fixed without national leadership. And our plans about everything from increasing entrepreneurship in the Black community to making sure we deliver equity in health and put an end to things like, the maternal mortality gap, are very well received because they are among the most comprehensive ideas put forward on this issue. The other thing that I think is important is for all of us who have experienced some kind of exclusion to be allies at a time like this. Each candidate brings a different experience and a different story forward. I don't have the experience of being a black American. I don't have the experience of talking to a teenage son about what to do when you were pulled over by a police officer. I can assume if I am walking in a department store and I'm fidgeting with something in my pocket that I will be given the benefit of the doubt and not followed. I don't have those personal experiences, but I do have the experience of belonging to a group that has been feared, hated, and denied opportunity in this country. And while those aren't the same, it's one of the reasons I'm powerfully motivated to ensure that nobody is denied opportunity in this country because of who they are.
You are a gay man. You are now ranked at least 4th in Iowa, and you're doing pretty well nationally. Has the history or the historic nature of what you're doing set in yet?
It's certainly moving when people of different ages come up to me at campaign events. High schoolers who let me know that I've made it easier for them to get through their day. People my parents' age with tears in their eyes who did not think something like this was ever going to be possible in their lifetime. And so I'm very conscious that there's a historic quality to this campaign. And at the same time, it's important to me that no one element of my story defined me. This is part of who I am, just like the fact that I'm a veteran and the fact that I'm a mayor, the fact that I'm young and the fact that I come from northern Indiana. And taken together, they add up to a story that I hope explains why I am motivated to lead America into a new sense of belonging as well as a better set of policies for our future.